All right, Josh, I am excited to have this conversation. I've known you for a long time and we've hung out and had some good times together, but this is a good opportunity for me to get to know you a little bit better as a business person. And one of the things that I want to start with, because I know we both have this passion about music, is early in your career, you worked at this place called the Boston Phoenix, something I grew up reading and really sort of worshiping from what was going on in the scene. And so that I don't get accused of being an inside baseball player here, because not everyone will know what the Boston Phoenix is. Tell us a little bit about what it was and what you did there.
Yeah, no, it's great to chat. Yeah, I think it's probably we've known each other now 10 years and this will be fun. The Boston Phoenix, was an alternative weekly newspaper. And to your point, really was the go to for arts, culture, and oddly political commentary as well. So I think everyone who lived in Boston at the time would pick up their paper on Thursdays from the iconic red box that the Phoenix was distributed in. They would grab it for their club listings that was happening that week. Remember when we used to go to the newspaper for movie show times? You'd go there, and the publication was started in the late '60s. I actually won a Pulitzer, and I was there back in the early 2000s, really as the digital transformation of media was happening. I was brought in to kind of help navigate that. So for anyone who was in another market, it's akin to the Village Voice, which was in New York. But yeah, it was just that weekly go-to for arts and culture.
Well, and I mentioned this. One of the things that I've loved about our relationship is you're a big time music fan, and not just a music fan, but you've actually got involved in the business. And we'll dig more deeply into that in a bit. But I'm assuming that given the fact that you were I believe the director of marketing there for them, that this is one of the stepping stones to you getting involved in music management and the music scene, and getting to know all of the artists that you've known over the years.
Yeah, so actually it was the opposite. It was sort of my transition out of the music industry. It's funny, I had been managing artists for 5 or 6 years. I worked for ASCAP, which is one of the performing rights organizations. And I would say I saw that the music industry was changing, didn't love where it was going, didn't love the business opportunities that it presented for people like myself in management. So was looking for what would that logical next step be. So being I was living in Boston, I figured the Boston Phoenix as sort of that publication that was, the go-to for breaking bands and clubs and also a lot of brands, it would be a great sort of transition. So I went to the Phoenix, still was managing artists, but like I said, really that was sort of my opportunity to kind of start to understand digital and understand digital media before I sort of transitioned purely, into tech.
See, this is the crazy thing, and it's why we do these conversations, because I never knew that, and now I know. And you have had the opportunity to work with some pretty cool bands, and we'll talk a little bit more about music in a bit. Uh, as I mentioned in the introduction up front in the show, you're currently the CEO of Worth Media Group, which includes Worth Magazine. I think a lot of people know the brand from that. And you and I have talked about your remit of, I want to say this gently, like breathing new life into the 33-year-old media property. How's that going? And I think a fun fact, which I mentioned in the show notes, I worked at Fidelity Investments for a long time, and I don't think I remembered that Fidelity was the one that actually started that off as one of its non-financial services businesses. So anyway, tell us, how's the journey so far?
It's interesting when you sent me over some of the questions and notes in advance, you know, I had never even stitched together my path, in my time at the Phoenix to where I am today. So when I started looking at it, right, when I was at the Phoenix, that was 2000, early 2000s. We're 20 years later. So I went from print, weekly publication to spending most of my career in around tech to now being back in print. And a lot has changed. I think the fun part about both, about being at the Phoenix, taking at that time, again, also about a 40-year-old brand, was figuring out how you stay relevant to an evolving audience. And to your point, Worth, started by Fidelity about 40 years ago, was known primarily for tips on wealth accumulation, financial advice, had changed hands a couple times, started to really lean into luxury lifestyle, but all with that idea of wealth accumulation. What we've been looking at is as the audience has evolved, back, when we acquired it, the audience was baby boomers, was aging Gen X, but we really saw the trend towards, what does the millennial want? When I talk about millennials, sometimes I sort of still think that they're young. Millennials are 29 to 44, right? This is the heart of our economy, of our workforce. So, number one, we had to figure out how to take the Worth brand that was known by boomers to really become relevant to this new successful and influential population of millennials. And that was the first exercise, really understanding what is the content that this audience is looking for, what is our core editorial ethos and our focus. And, we did a couple things. I think one, if you pick up a copy of Worth now, we added two words to the cover, beyond wealth, because again, it's not, the word worth historically is, I guess, thought of aligned with net worth and financial worth. The word worth could really transcend that, could really mean a lot more. So adding beyond worth really sort of was our first sort of way of saying that we wanted to cover topics beyond just financial success. And then we looked at sort of the millennial audience, the affluent audience that we cared about and what mattered to them. And that really wound up being a curated blend of business, finance, innovation. So tech obviously plays a big role in now our content. Luxury is still in there. We're not abandoning luxury. But then the last part is really this idea of impact. What we saw were that millennials really did care about mission and purpose. But don't get me wrong, it's not a trade-off for them. They want to work for companies with mission and purpose. They want to purchase from companies that have mission and purpose. They want to invest in those companies, but with no trade-offs. They don't want to pay higher prices. They don't want lower returns on their investments. They don't want to get paid less, right? So I think this idea now of worth beyond wealth and how do we look at that intersection of business, finance, tech, and impact, but also keeping in mind that this audience isn't looking at it as, someone say as hippies did, where they gave up their material things and were willing to sort of err on the side of social good. The millennial audience now cares just about as much as profits as they do purpose.
Well, two things come to mind in that answer. So one is one of the guests we had on earlier was Senator Mallory McMorrow, who's running for U.S. Senate, and she mentioned while we were talking about the Daily Show that she was a millennial, and I thought to myself, wow, I guess that's right. Like you are definitely like they are that age now. Whatever you said, it was 28 to 40 something, and
44. Yeah. I mean, right.
44.
Like we're just Gen X, right? So, yeah.
We're just Gen X. The other interesting thing is thinking about evolving that purpose and involving millennials. And so kudos to you for sort of having that awareness and realizing that those are the things that you needed to connect the dots on. And that does lead us into this next question, because as you know, this podcast focuses on influential leaders who are doing societal good. And one of Worth's biggest contributions under your leadership, I believe anyway, is the creation of the Worthy 100. You and I have talked a little bit about this. Tell us about this prestigious list and how it came to be.
Yeah, I think, we were looking again at all of these topics related to mission and purpose and impact. It's amazing. You add a single letter to a word and it radically changes, the meaning. So by adding the Y to worth, people thought very differently around worthy. And we thought it would be a great way to recognize, people each year for their positive contribution to society. And the list, we're going on our fifth year, is really a mixture of celebrity, athletes, executives, entrepreneurs that you've never heard of, but that are using their platform to in some way address a sort of a societal need. So everyone loves lists, right? Everyone loves being on a list, but what we saw was that everyone loves being celebrated for the good that they're doing. So regardless of how much money you have, we could do a list of the richest people in the world, the billionaire list, but being recognized for the impact you're having. In many cases, these people are happier for. So everyone from, Will I Am for the great work that he's doing in LA around education and the digital divide, to chefs like Jose Andres and all the work he's doing, uh, to CEOs of big companies. So, each person on the list uniquely in some way is contributing towards the a societal need. It's hard. It's not a quantitative list, so there's no set of criteria by which, hey, you have to check these 10 boxes. It's a list that our editors take submissions from all year. It's people that we nominate internally. We obviously want to make sure that there's no negative sort of impact of these individuals, that for the most part, the work they've done is for societal good. And then we curate a unique list. We've never, I believe, had the same person on the list twice. So we always are coming up with 100 new people each year. And then we typically do a large celebration of the list in December, aligned with the issue coming out. So it's just a fun way to again reinforce how could people, no matter how successful and influential they are, use their platform to make the world a better place.
Well, you helped answer a second question, which is what was the process? So that sounds like that makes sense because I think to have something that's quantitative is it's too subjective. So you do need to have that qualitative and then do that journalistic research to make sure, to your point, they haven't done anything untoward or that would undermine their position on the list. Selfishly, sounds like you answered a question I've been asking other guests. You've given me a blueprint of who else do I want to have on the show going forward. So thank you for confirming in my mind that that is exactly what I want to do. I want to talk about another piece of the business, and I think this comes from a little bit of the sister company that is where I first met you, and that was Techonomy. So, Worth Media, I know recently hosted an event in Boston called Living Well, Optimizing Health and Longevity, which is, noble. Tell us a little bit more about your commitment to these purpose-built events and like the one that you did called Techonomy Impact, which I believe focuses on climate change and, you know, obviously that one's talking about the innovation and tackling climate change and advancing sustainable development.
Yeah, so look, we first look at our, like any other media company would, or any product company would look at product market fit, look at our audience, and look at what are the topics that typically resonate with our audience. So to your point, healthcare, I think health, wellness, longevity, are topics that are hugely relevant across a wide spectrum. With Techonomy, we took a slightly different approach to truly looking at innovation and tech's impact on those areas. And that was an event that we hosted, for a couple years called Techonomy Health. We evolved that to what we're now calling Living Well. But what we saw was our community of successful and influential people. When you look at what is top of mind for them, it's health span, right? It's not just lifespan. It's not just living longer. It's living a more fulfilling life. So we put together this event, which brought together everyone from scientists to innovators, to even companies that are providing financial products to help people live better longer. So, while I agree, we're doing this because we think it have a positive impact on our community and society. We're also looking at everything through a commercial lens. Does it sort of fit the needs of our audience as well as, our corporate, sponsors and partners? So living well and sort of health, wellness, and longevity will continue to be, an important topic just as much as luxury travel is. There's topics like travel that obviously also bubble to the top of sort of our community. When you look at things like our Techonomy Impact event, which historically was called Techonomy Climate, as well as things like our groundbreaking women event, which really focuses a little bit more on things like DE&I and investment in women-led startups and the gap there. Yes, we're trying to help elevate conversations about how do we address the needs of these various markets, but it's challenging. It's challenging, especially in a time where things like even the word climate, hence why we changed the event from Techonomy Climate to Techonomy Impact, could be very, very polarizing. They could be in the partisan world we live in. Sometimes it's hard to bring together these events in a successful way because most of our business is funded by advertisers and sponsors, and brands have even had to make a conscious decision on how they align with some of these societal topics. So, we sit here where we want to do the right thing, right? We want to create these forums and these conversations around some of these mission driven topics. But at the end of the day, we're not structured as a nonprofit. We are trying to find ways to find brands that could underwrite and fund these activities. So it's always an interesting sort of, way to navigate some of these topics right now, but it does sort of align with our ethos. And I do believe that we will stay the course. We will continue to focus on these meaningful topics. We've been a huge proponent of looking at things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which provides a great framework to really all of the things we need to solve for. And that's from, you know, quality education, healthcare, clean water, infrastructure, all these topics. And while again, we believe that these conversations need to happen, we also recognize that these are huge financial opportunities, right? These are huge financial opportunities for investors, for new companies to come in and address these challenges. So, on a daily basis, like I said, we're sort of looking at what are the right topics that resonate with our audience, as well as the ones that, again, we could find commercial support from our sponsors and partners.
Well, it makes sense. And you and I have had this long going thread. I think we even did a panel at one point in time during COVID called Doing Well and Doing Good and finding that balance. And I know in the conversation I had with Samantha Ski, who is your counterpart at She Media, which is part of Penske, she talked about that pragmatic. Can you align the commercial opportunities with the societal needs? And I think the companies that do that and do it well are the ones that succeed. And by the way, have the reach and the financial power to be able to do meaningful things, right? There are a lot of nonprofits that are doing great work, but they end up banging their head against the wall because they can never get outside of their own container.
Yeah, and look, most recently we could point to things like AB InBev and Target taking societal stances on certain topics that could be polarizing and have direct effect on their bottom line. So, there's companies that have made choices that have directly sort of again had this impact. You have other companies like Patagonia that had just built it into their core DNA and they don't care. They don't care if it becomes out of vogue to talk about the environment and climate change because that is part of their core business. So I think that's the other part is our companies, are we doing this just because it's the thing, the zeitgeist of the moment, or are we doing this because we truly believe in the topic? And I think that again, we'll continue to evolve and find these spaces that people want to come together and sort of, in some cases, I'm okay with healthy debate, right? I think just we're all tired of just people taking a very knee jerk reaction to even something like DE&I or climate.
Yeah, we live in a world of gray, and I think it is okay because there aren't really as many right answers as people think there are. There are shades of right. And that does lead to this new question that I'm starting to ask. I have friends that are much smarter than I am that I've asked for feedback. And one was if I'm doing a show that's about societal impact, I want to ask you because I know from a businessman, you're doing a great job at balancing that. But how does it feel to you personally, Josh Campbell, knowing that you're doing these events, you're sort of doing these lists, you're celebrating these leaders that are helping America in a time where we need it most. How does that personally make you feel to be attached to something that is quite a noble cause?
The honest answer is I feel like it's still probably not enough. I think that it's great that, I've been lucky enough to find a way to balance what I do professionally and have hopefully some level of positive impact on society. We could all figure out ways to do that. I also sit on a couple of nonprofit boards where I'm able to hopefully take sort of what I've done in my professional career and bring to sort of nonprofits. But, I'd probably be kidding to say, hey, I feel great. I feel like I'm doing all that I can. But I guess at least we are doing our part in at least bringing together these conversations, trying to mobilize capital We have amazing access to family office and investors that can make a huge financial impact. So, long way of saying is, yeah, I guess I won't pat myself too much on the back. I think I'm trying to personally do well and do good, but you could always do more.
I like the authenticity of that answer, and I'm not surprised because that's who you are. And I think we all could do better. But it is important when you do have a platform and you have a platform, you're able to reach some of the most impactful people in the world. And so you are taking the time to do some of these important things. So I thank you and thank Worth Magazine for doing that and the Worthy 100 and the events you're doing. So this is now where we shift to a few fun questions. This is so people can get to know you a little bit better. Sort of like I've got to know you like behind the scenes, after hours. The first one that I'm really curious about because I've gotten some very fun answers with this one is what is the dirtiest sounding word that isn't actually dirty? And the example I give is spatchcock. The last guest that I had on, Dr. Joseph Wu, had the word angina. I'm like, that one is perfect as well. Hopefully I didn't steal yours.
It's funny too because it's a word that we just started using. So obviously, we at Worth work a lot with the automobile industry, especially in their transition to EVs. And with EVs come a new format. And I was talking to someone from a brand, and they said to me, "Well, you could just stick it in the frunk." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean I could stick it in the frunk?" And there is a front trunk, so it is not a dirty word. It is though, but I guess for me, especially when we use it around the office, everyone sort of giggles and feels like it's dirtier than it is.
Well, especially when used with the term sticking it in the, right? So, and I've always found frunk because I live out in California in the world of Teslas, and I think they were one of the first to develop the frunk. So that's a good one. I know for a fact that you've had a chance to meet a lot of very famous people in your life. And so that's one of the cool things about this show is the people I have on are influential. What I'd like to know though is out of those people you've met, who has impressed you the most?
Who has impressed me the most? It's a hard question. I think one person who I've been hugely impressed by recently is Aloe Black. And Aloe Black may not be a household name or as famous as some of the other people, but here is someone who is a Grammy nominated artist who also started a biotech, startup and is just such a thoughtful human being and really on all levels, right? I think we all know, someone who, you talk to and they come up with things that you'd never expect, but he's actually executing, building a company while still touring and writing. Obviously in my world of artists, I'm most impressed when I see those types of people. The other is Adam Met. Adam is the A in the band AJR that did a recent sort of stadium tour. Adam, in addition to being, one of the founding brothers of the band, just finished about a year ago his PhD, wrote a book, is a climate activist. So I'll say back to your question about how do you feel, about the good you're doing, you realize when you meet some of these other people, you're only doing a fraction of what others are doing. And there are two artists that are on tour recording and still find time, to have a huge impact. So I would say that the two of them most recently have just really left a mark on sort of me and where I think I could do more.
Well, I love those answers. I've actually had the benefit of meeting Aloe Black myself. I met him at a conference called Life Itself, and he was one you would not know that he was a big deal because he was just a guy. And so he and I chatted, I think, for 15 or 20 minutes. For those listening in, if you're trying to recall where you know him from, he sang the song Wake Me Up. He sang the song The Man, which got a lot of radio play. And that is cool to know that they are doing such societal good. And that ties in well with this show. This is another new question that I'm asking, and I hope you don't mind me testing these out on you, Josh, but I feel like because I know you, I can do this. And that is throughout your career, or personal life, what is your biggest regret? And I know that's a bigger than a bread box question, but this is how we make ourselves feel vulnerable and create this space so that we can have that emotional connection.
Yeah. It was hard. It's really a hard question to answer because I try to look forward and not look back at the choices I've made and where I could have made different ones, I guess I'll go with back to the music industry. And it's a story I think that I've told you before. It was a label had called me when I was managing artists to go take a look at an artist that was doing a showcase in Boston, and I'd gotten to know the founder of the label. They had signed this band. He said, "Hey, go take a look at them. They might be looking for a new manager, and just want to know what you're thinking, what you think of them." And I wound up going to the show, checking out the band, spending some time with the band, and saying, yeah, their songs were decent. The front man was, kind of a bit of an ass. And the next day, the label called me. They said, "Hey, what did you think?" I said, they were good, but I have another band that sounds just like them. So even if the opportunity was there, really not interested. That wound up being Maroon.
I don't know why when you said the lead singer is a bit of an ass, I'm like, is that Adam Levine? So isn't that funny that out of the thousands of bands, that was the one? And yeah, that probably was a miss.
So regret, maybe in sort of at least saying, "Hey, this is a great band." Maybe I would still say they're not a great band, but yeah, it's no like I said, is I don't think I think it's hard to harp on regret. Right. I think in many cases, it's, really just kind of looking back at the choices you made and sort of just moving forward.
Well, excuse me, that's a great answer. And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that amazing opportunity that you passed on. This last question, it feels funny asking you even because based on the conversation, based on what we just talked about, you being so interwound into the music industry, I'd love to know one band that you wish you had seen in concert, but you didn't get a chance to and probably won't be able to because they're not still with us or they've broken up or whatever it is.
Or they died.
Or they died. I didn't want to have to be morose and say that.
And honestly, like I was trying to think about that because I've seen a lot of bands and musicians, and probably the one that I never saw that I would have loved to was the Beastie Boys. And again, just thinking about it was, I think License to Ill was definitely one of my first CDs, and I still listen to them to this day. And not being able to see them was probably a regret. Had opportunities, never got to see them, but I would say, yeah, Beastie Boys.
Well, and that is the worst. I think it's that not only you didn't see them, like I never really would have been able to go see the Beatles or Jimi Hendrix. I would have been too young. But it's you had the opportunity, like I had the chance to see Nirvana 3 times in the same summer and passed on it. And to this day, I still tell my kids, I say, if you want to see someone, let's work together to make it happen because you never know. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. So you wound up never seeing Nirvana.
I never ended up seeing Nirvana. Seen Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters a number of times, but yeah, no, I that is one of my regrets. I've seen most of the other bands that I've always wanted to see, but thank you, Josh, so much for taking the time and for everyone listening in. It was fun to get to know you better. And again, I've known you, I think, pretty well, more than the average bear. We've hung out at South by Southwest and some Techonomy events before, but really appreciate your perspective on all things worthy, societal good, doing well, and doing good. So appreciate you.
Thanks, Aaron.